Hello, this video is for the Ocr A psychology specification, and more specifically, this is a cognitive psychology study and it's based on moray today. So, today we'll be looking at moray study on attention in dichotic listening tasks. A dichotic listening task is basically when you have one sort of piece of information going into one ear and another sort of piece of information going in another ear. So for example, someone's talking to you in one ear and someone's talking to you in another ear, and you're trying to focus on both. That would be dichotic. The background to this study is some don called Sherry. So Sherry said that at a party, if someone says your name, you pay attention. I mean, just think about when you're at a party and there's a lot of noise, but you hear your name, you instantly pay attention and see where that come from, right? Well, that's what Sherry's saying. And Moray wanted to expand on this more by doing 3 experiments. Don't worry, by the end of this video, you understand every single experiment. Okay, firstly, I'd like to clarify that all 3 of these experiments were laboratory experiments and they all used an opportunity sample. Okay? Another thing I'd like to say. For all of these experiments, there were some controls, okay? So firstly, the same tape recorder was used for all of the tasks that we're about to talk about. Secondly, loudness was matched for each participant, right, by asking the participant to say, when they hear something in one ear and another thing in another ear, are they equally as loud? So basically, Moray asked his participants to say, oh, in my right ear, it's a bit louder than my left. Would you just maybe, up the left ear a bit so they're both equally as loud? Both messages in both ears are equally as loud. That is another control. And another control is all the participants were given some proses, like a paragraph, but it's just some paragraphs, right? Like 4 passages of paragraphs to shadow before each experiment. Shadowing is basically just reading, sort of like not reading, but if you hear something and you repeat it, that's shadowing. So if someone says, the big alligator walks in your right ear, and you say the big alligator walks, that is shadowing. Okay, let's begin by looking at experiment 1. So in experiment 1, we don't know the participants, they just vanished. I mean, we don't know who they are. Moray never gave any details, but that's okay. He did use male and female undergraduate workers though. For experiment 1, he used a repeated measures design, okay? Which means that all participants did both aspects of the laboratory experiment. So they did both conditions. So, in experiment 1, Moray just wanted to see if you're doing a dichotic listening task where you're shadowing one message, will you ignore all of the unattended/rejected message? So basically, they're in a dichotic listening task. As I said, you have 2 pieces of information going into each ear. If you're asked to shadow one piece of information and asked to ignore the other piece of information, will you remember any of the words from the ignored information which you were told to ignore? Okay? In this ignored information, there was a short list of words, approximately 35 words being said into the unattended ear. Okay? The participant was asked to recall content of the unattended ear. So the ear which he wasn't meant to be paying attention to, the participant was asked to actually recall the content of what was actually being said in that ear. And even after that, they had to do a test. Now, this test was basically 3 sets of words. One set of words were from the message which they were meant to shadow, meant to regurgitate and repeat. The other set of words was from the rejected message, the message they were meant to ignore. And a third set of words were from a message which was just random. So, for example, they've never literally seen these words maybe that whole day. Like, they're just random words, like apples, strawberries, cranberries, just random words, yeah? Okay, some results. There was no evidence of words in the rejected message, the message you were meant to ignore, of being recognized. That tells us something very, very important. That tells us that when you're paying attention to one thing, you block out the other thing that you're hearing. So for example, if I'm paying attention to somebody's conversation and some dude across the street shouts at me, I mean, not my name, just shouts, I'm not going to pay attention to them. because I'm selecting my attention. My attention is selective. I'm paying attention to one thing. Another result was the difference between the random words and the shadowed words, are very significant, which shows that they could recognize a shadowed message. This is just important to know because basically it's not by chance. So they did recognize a shadowed message. They didn't just, recognize it by chance. Otherwise, they would have got some of the random words right as well. And another conclusion is this suggests that attention is selective. We have a selective nature to just, pay attention to one specific thing and cut everything out of our attention, right? So that's experiment 1. And as you know from experiment 1, the dependent variable was the number of words recognized in the rejected message, because it did that test with 3 different set of words. And remember I told you that one of the set of words were from the rejected message. Well, the dependent variable is how many words are they going to recognize from that rejected message. Right, from experiment 2, okay, so we know that Sherry said at a party, if someone says your name, you'll pay attention, right? Moray really wanted to expand on this. He used repeated measures design for experiment 2 with 12 participants. The aim was to find the limits of the attentional block. So the attentional block is, as I said earlier, when you're paying attention to one thing, you tend to block out all the other information which is around you, apart from that one thing you're paying attention to, right? Moray wanted to test the limits of this attentional block. So what can penetrate this attentional block? What can get through it? What will make you pay attention? So Moray did an experiment. He got participants to shadow some text. And then some of the participants had instructions which were placed in one of their ears, telling them to change to the other ear. Some had the participant's name before. So for example, if one of the participants had a message saying, switch to your other ear, some of them would have had John or Gary switch to your other ear. So by putting the participant's name before, they're trying to make this an effective message. The results were not surprising. They do actually back up Sherry's finding. The presence of a name can cause an instruction to be heard, thus penetrating an attentional barrier. Most participants ignored the instructions, however, and thought it was merely an attempt to distract them. So, these 2 conclusions are very important. The first one is suggesting that if you make a message very effective, such as using a participant's name, maybe even saying their mother's name, that could penetrate the attentional block. That could make you pay attention. However, a lot of participants ignored the instructions because they thought it was an attempt to distract them. But the most important thing is not this. The most important thing is this, that people actually heard the message, because they were trying to block out the other message, right? But the fact that they even heard the instructions is very, very important, because it shows that this effective message, by using their name, actually penetrated the attentional block. Okay, and now experiment 3 was 2 groups of 14 participants, and it was an independent measures design. So this is a bit of a different experimental design to the other 2 studies, right? The aim was to show if instructions, like the instructions previously, change the chances, not like the instructions previously, like instructions in general, before you do the experiment. You've got instructions such as read the text, read the prose, shadow the prose, right? So he wanted to see if the instructions that you were given before you did the experiment changes the chances of the rejected material being understood. So for example, one group were told to shadow only, so only to shadow the message, and the other group was told to remember some numbers, right? So basically in this experiment, in every single group, numbers were put in, right? Like halfway through, some numbers were put in, okay, into like the rejected ear, because this is still a dichotic listening task. In one group, they were told that these numbers are actually going to come up. Try and remember these numbers. In the other group, they were not told anything. They were just told to shadow the prose. Strangely, there was actually no significant difference between the mean number of numbers reported in both conditions, which shows that neutral material like numbers, random words, they're not important enough to actually break through your attentional barrier. Once you've got your attention, fixed on one thing, such as shadowing a message, nothing, apart from an effective thing, as we know from experiment 2, can make you switch your attention, which shows that attention has a very selective nature. And for experiment 3, the dependent variable was the number of digits recalled, as we know. So, yeah, that's it for Moray. It's a very hard study. There's 3 different experiments you need to know and a bit of background, but it's pretty easy. I mean, it's not too bad. So goodbye. Good Nash.